Hola amigos, it's Day of the Dead, aka Dia De Los Muertos, and we're going to be talking about death. Te vas a morir, nada es tan terrible, te vas a morir, no hay más que esa certeza, te vas a morir y no hay garantías, te vas a morir, así que cállate, levántate, enamórate, desenamórate, ríe, llora, canta, baila ahora, ahorita, antes de que no puedas hacerlo. Te vas a morir. You are going to die. Firstly, I apologize to any of the Spanish speakers here. I'm only on level 1, unit 5 of Duolingo. But I'm in Mexico and we've just celebrated Day of the Dead, aka Dia De Los Muertos. I promised you that I'd take you with me, and we're here. So death is on my mind. And to be honest, death is on my mind quite a lot. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about it. And I'm not exactly why I think about death so much. Potentially from my career as a doctor. And I think being exposed to so much of it does change the way you think about it. And I'm coming to a point where I'm grateful for it. Let me explain myself. Probably need a little bit of context of where I actually am. So we are currently in a place called Bacalar, Mexico. And I'm sitting next to a cenote. So a cenote is basically a sinkhole, which is super deep and it's thought to be caused by asteroids that hit the earth and made these huge holes in the earth. And quite funny, actually, when we arrived to the cenote, I refused to pay the entrance fee and I started walking away. But the owner of the place, he came, convinced me to come back in for free, and he's given me and Joe about 8 beers. And the thing is, I don't even drink, so I've got all these Coronas sitting next to me. That I'm just gonna kind of have to give to Joel and maybe have a few sips myself. But yeah, super generous guy. I can't believe that happened. So this story isn't my first ever experience of death. This is just my first experience of death as a doctor. So I was in my first year out of medical school and I was on my surgical rotation doing surgical night shifts. As you know, night shifts are pretty grim, but I was chilling in the doctor's office. Well, not chilling, I was working in the doctor's office and one of the nurses comes in. This patient so-and-so has died on the ward. You need to come and verify the death. Now, this is the first time I'd verified a death. I'd learnt about it in medical school, like what you needed to do. Have a listen to the heart, listen to the lungs, look at the eyes. So I did a quick Google to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And I got myself ready to walk into this side cubicle. I opened the door, and when I go in, there's a dead body sitting there in the dark. And being fairly young, fresh out of medical school, I freaked out, turned around, and went back outside. I couldn't be in the room with that dead body in the dark like that. It was just freaking me out way too much. So I had to ask the nurse to come back in and stand there with me whilst I was verifying the death. So quite embarrassing really, but someone has since told me I could have just turned the light on to do the examination. I didn't have to do it in the dark. Didn't cross my mind at the time. And since then I've experienced a lot of death, and thankfully I no longer need to get a nurse to hold my hand when I see a dead body. But I've always wondered, as a doctor, is it healthy to be exposed to so much death? Does it change the way you think about the world? And people always ask me when they find out I'm a doctor, oh, you must have some crazy stories. Can you tell us some stories about your work? And it's quite strange really, but whenever someone asks me that question, I find it hard to retrieve good stories. I've always managed to keep work and life quite separate and always managed to never really take it home with me. I know I've experienced lots of crazy things, seen a lot of crazy things, but it's almost like I forget it as soon as I leave the hospital or leave work. It kind of reminds me of that TV series Severance, if you've ever seen it. Great series, highly recommend. But yeah, I've always wondered, is it healthy to have kind of 2 separate lives like that, where you leave work and you just don't think about it? If you're a psychologist or anything, let me know. I'd be very curious to see if that's normal and healthy. But the question I have is, does being reminded of death daily help you live a better life? And it's not just doctors, it's anyone in healthcare, nurses, or anyone who works in the hospital who has to deal with death on a regular basis. I think in healthcare, what we get to witness more than the general population is that transition from life to death, when people are on the cusp of death and you get to see someone who's alive and then you see someone who's dead. There are obviously people in the population who have seen loved ones go through that transition, but I think it's just a lot more of a regular occurrence for people who work in that environment. But that's pretty heavy, right? Dealing with that every single day. And I think one way of dealing with that is with humor. So to give you an example of this, I want to tell you about something called the O sign. So in medicine, we have a lot of clinical signs, basically which are things that patients show and tell us what condition that is probably underlying. So for example, when we listen to the chest and we hear crackles, hearing crackles or crepitations is a clinical sign. When we see yellowing of the skin, that's a clinical sign of jaundice. And when we see the conjunctiva are pale, that can sometimes be a clinical sign of anemia. Now, the O sign is a terrible, dark medical joke where when someone's dying, they tend to lean back and have their mouth open wide like this. And that's the O sign. Terrible joke. And it's so messed up when you think about it, making light of such a heavy situation, that's someone who's dying, that's someone's loved one who's dying. At the same time, how can someone who deals with that daily process that heavy situation? How can they come to terms with that? And I think humor is one way we deal with it. Now let me tell you another mess up joke we had. It's not my mess up joke, it's one of my senior colleagues when I was working back in the UK, specifically on a geriatrics ward. On geriatrics, you tend to see a lot of death. It comes with the territory. And in the UK, if you were attending a patient just before they died, you usually have to do a death certificate and a cremation form if they're being cremated. And one weird thing about doing a cremation form is that the doctor doing the form actually gets paid a little bonus for doing it. I can't remember exactly why that is. I think it's potentially because back in the day, doctors had to do it in their spare time out of hours. So it was kind of out of hours work. And the paperwork was fairly hefty. It wasn't something that you could do really quickly. And often these cremation forms are called ash cash. You see what we did there? That's some dark medical humor for you. But my senior colleague who I worked with when I was on geriatrics, he called them goosies. Why did he call them goosies? It's because every time he had to do one of these cremation forms and he got that bonus, he would go and buy himself a bottle of Grey Goose vodka. I loved working with that doctor because he would make me laugh every single day and he would help me make light of potentially what could be seen as quite a dark situation, especially when I was so early on in my career. And I'm reading a book at the moment called How to Write Funny by Steve Dickers. Clearly it's not working very well yet, but in the book he says, those lucky few who can find humor in a situation, any situation, will not only endure it, but enjoy it, and inspire others to do the same. And I'm sure some people don't cope with the heaviness of it all quite so well, and maybe his goosies were a sign of something darker, maybe he was using alcohol to drown his sorrows, who knows. But I definitely know that his humor helped me a lot. And if you are medical, if you work in healthcare, please tell me your darkest twisted medical humor. I will most likely find it funny. Just leave it in the comment below. So I've told you how some doctors deal with death, but that doesn't really answer the question of, does being exposed to so much death actually help? So let me explain how Mexicans deal with it. Day of the Dead. Dia De Los Muertos. What the F is it? Now you've probably seen that James Bond movie where he's escaping from the bad guys. During Day of the Dead in Mexico, everyone's got their face painted. And it seems like a kind of fun festival and he's doing lots of cool stuff. Now I wasn't quite being 007, but I did get my face painted and eat some tacos. And we got to celebrate Day of the Dead in a small town called Sayulita, which is a small beachside town, completely overrun by Americans and Canadians. Not that I have anything against Americans or Canadians, but I came to Mexico to hang around with Mexicans, if you know what I mean. Nonetheless, the festival brought out the best of Mexico. The food, the music, the colors, all the things we associate with Mexico. And it's all a way of honoring their loved ones who have passed, honoring their ancestors. And they do it in a very unique way. As far as I'm aware, there's no other culture who celebrates death in this way. I'm most definitely wrong about that, so please correct me in the comments. For me, it's so strange for death to be surrounded by so much color, so much fun, music, high spirits, humor, and fun cartoon characters. My only experience of celebrating death is in British graveyards. Have you seen how depressing those places are? And I found the whole experience fascinating, and I feel blessed to have got to do this in this part of the world. And in some ways, Mexicans deal with death the same way as doctors do, with lightheartedness and fun. Now, I have no idea if Mexicans deal with death better than other parts of the world, but it seems like they accept death and they see it as a natural part of life. And I really like that, and I'm going to take it, I'm going to steal it and take it home with me. In the same way doctors regularly have to deal with death, Mexicans take it upon themselves to remind themselves of death every single year. They remind themselves that they're going to die. Here's why I think being Mexican or being a doctor helps you live a better life. You are constantly being reminded that you're going to die. I think most of us walking around don't really remember that that's going to happen. We kind of walk around like we're invincible. And of course, I don't think it's good to be walking around continuously contemplating our own mortality. But I really genuinely think, and of course I can only speak for myself, I think being reminded of death regularly is only a good thing. Having death constantly on my mind has helped me live with more purpose and more urgency. People think death is just for the old, but I think working as a doctor really skews your perspective on who can die. No hay garantías. There are no guarantees. As I was making this video, I visited some quite fun websites where you put in your birthday and it shows your whole life in weeks and shows you how much you've lived and how much longer you have to live. Now this is best case scenario. This is if nothing happens to you. This is if you do all of Brian Johnson's and Peter Attia's longevity routines, and even then it's not a given. Why am I telling you this? It's not to depress you. It's because I want to remind you, memento mori, remember you must die. This thought, I believed, helped give me the urgency that I needed to change my life when I was miserable. When I was working as a doctor in the NHS in the UK, and I was just sad most of the time, remembering that I was going to die helped push me, helped make me realize that time isn't a given, and I had to do something about my situation because time is ticking. It pushed me to go travel around Southeast Asia for 6 months. It helped me move to the other side of the world and find a better life in Australia. It helped my fiance and I to take a whole year off work to go traveling whilst we're still young, fit and healthy. It even helped me start this YouTube channel. And I'm not trying to say just quit your job and live a hedonistic lifestyle, spend all your savings because there could be no tomorrow. But maybe just let yourself do the thing that is calling to you. Of course you have to pay your dues, you have to do things in life that you don't want to do. You have to delay gratification in some respects. But remember, delayed gratification in the extreme leads to no gratification. Because life is temporary. And the fact that life is temporary is what makes it beautiful. It's like a sunset. If it was there all the time, it wouldn't be that great. The fact that it comes and goes is what makes it special. So like the Mexicans, like the doctors, remind yourself of death, because through death, we see how beautiful life really is.